Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. It's late at night at a crowded international airport in the United States. Your long-haul flight has finally landed after 14 hours in the air. Your legs are stiff from sitting, your back hurts, your eyes sting from exhaustion. Sighs. All you want now is a shower, a bed, and a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. But there's still one last barrier between you and the outside world, the immigration line. You move forward slowly with a stream of other passengers, passport in one hand, phone in the other, half awake and replaying the journey in your mind. Eventually, your turn comes. You step up to the booth. The officer takes your passport, looks at the screen, and starts asking the standard questions in a calm, almost robotic voice. Where did you fly in from? How long do you plan to stay? What's the purpose of your visit? You answer honestly, just as millions of travelers do every year. Exhales. Everything feels routine. Everything feels... Then the officer glances at the phone in your hand and says something that instantly changes the mood. Please unlock your phone and hand it to me. For a moment, your mind stops, because that small device isn't just electronics. It holds almost everything about your life. Chats with family, photos going back years, messages you barely remember, private jokes shared with friends, maybe even personal notes and documents. You hesitate for a fraction of a second, not because you've done anything wrong, but because the request goes straight into your private world. Still, you don't want any problems. You don't want to get delayed. So you type in your passcode, the screen lights up, and you slide the phone across the desk. 3 seconds. That's all it took. In those 3 seconds, without thinking much about it, you may have just made one of the most expensive privacy mistakes a traveler can make at a U.S. airport, not financially, but in terms of exposure and risk. Because in that tiny window, a very small technical detail that almost nobody talks about might have opened access to years of your messages, photos, and data. A few hours later, some travelers are already in their hotel rooms, starting their trip. Others are sitting in a quiet secondary inspection room, replaying every moment and wondering how a simple arrival turned into a serious immigration issue. And often, the gap between those two experiences comes down to details no one explained to them before they boarded the plane. I'm Artur from Immigration Monitor, and in this video we're going to unpack something that's rarely laid out clearly for people traveling to the United States. What border officers can legally look at on your phone, how small decisions around your device can have big consequences, and which common misunderstandings turn a normal entry into a major problem. Before we continue, one important note. This video is for general information and education only. It is not legal advice, not immigration advice, and not tailored to your personal situation. Laws and policies can change, and how they apply depends on the facts of each case. Always follow lawful instructions from border officers, and if you have concerns about your specific rights or case, speak with a qualified lawyer or professional. Now, let's start with one of the most misunderstood realities about entering the United States. Many travelers assume that the constitutional protections they've heard about, especially around privacy and searches, work exactly the same way at an airport as they do inside the country. They've heard that in most situations, authorities can't simply take your phone and search through it without a warrant from a judge. Inside the U.S., in everyday life, those protections are often very strong. A random police officer on the street usually can't just grab your phone and start scrolling through your messages without legal justification. But at an international border, the legal framework is different. Airports, seaports, and land crossings fall under what's often called the Border Search Authority. Under this legal doctrine, U.S. Customs and border officers have much broader powers to inspect people and property trying to enter the country. That can include luggage, documents, and in many cases, electronic devices, and they may be allowed to do this without first obtaining a warrant. In practical terms, that means the privacy expectations you're used to inside the country do not operate in exactly the same way when you're standing at an immigration counter. This is where the first big mistake often occurs. Some travelers think the best way to respond to a request for a phone search is to immediately challenge the officer on constitutional grounds. They might say things like, "You need a warrant to look at my phone," or "You can't search this without probable cause." Those lines may reflect how people understand their rights in certain domestic situations, but saying them in the middle of a primary inspection almost never makes the officer close the phone and send you on your way. From the officer's point of view, what started as a standard inspection has now become a more complicated case. The usual result is that you're sent to secondary inspection, a separate area where officers can review your file more thoroughly, ask detailed questions, and, in some instances, look more deeply at your belongings and devices. In other words, what could have been a 2-minute interaction can turn into hours of waiting and questioning, largely because the conversation shifted into a confrontation. Understanding how border search rules work doesn't mean you have no protections. It means the rules are different, and arguing legal theory at the booth usually makes things more difficult, not easier. Once you accept that, the next detail becomes critical. Even if you cooperate with a phone check, how your device is set up in the moment you hand it over can dramatically change what the officer sees. That brings us back to those 3 seconds. Picture the scene again. You're asked to unlock your phone. You enter your passcode or use face recognition, the home screen appears, and you pass the phone across. It all happens almost automatically. But in those few seconds, most people forget to consider one basic question. Is the phone still connected to the internet? Modern phones blur the line between what's truly stored on the device and what's being pulled in from the cloud. A lot of what you see on your screen isn't fully saved locally. Photos sync with online storage services, email apps continuously fetch new messages from remote servers, messaging apps like WhatsApp may sync older chats or cloud backups. Notes, documents, and app content are often mirrored from online accounts. Internal guidelines for basic device checks generally focus on data that is present on the device itself. But if your phone is still on mobile data or Wi-Fi, opening an app can instantly pull in additional information from remote servers. Your inbox updates. Archived messages appear. Old photos start loading. Within seconds, your device can display content that wasn't fully stored on the phone when you first unlocked it. From your point of view, it can feel like older, deeply personal data comes out of nowhere simply because the phone stayed online after you handed it over. This is why many privacy-conscious travelers, including those who are not doing anything wrong, follow a simple precaution before passing over an unlocked phone. They briefly switch the device into airplane mode, which typically turns off cellular data and also disables Wi-Fi and Bluetooth unless you manually re-enable them. That step doesn't delete anything, and it doesn't mean you're refusing a lawful search. It simply limits the phone to showing what is already on the device at that moment, rather than allowing apps to keep pulling more information from the cloud while someone else is holding it. The key point here is not about outsmarting anyone. It's about understanding how your own technology behaves in real time. Once an unlocked device is connected to the internet, modern apps can quietly reveal far more than most people realize. Now let's look at one specific app that comes up in these stories more than almost any other: WhatsApp. Many people feel confident handing over their phone because they've heard WhatsApp uses end-to-end encryption. It sounds like the ultimate protection. Your messages are scrambled in a way that keeps outsiders from reading them. That protection is very real, for one phase of communication. While your message is traveling from your phone to the other person's device across the internet, end-to-end encryption stops third parties from easily intercepting and reading it. But once that message arrives and shows up on your screen, the encryption step is finished. On your device, the message exists in readable form. Anyone holding your unlocked phone can open WhatsApp and read those chats exactly as you do. So when you unlock your device and hand it to an officer, encryption is no longer the shield many people imagine it to be. Your conversations are there, organized into threads, sometimes going back many months or even years. Here's another critical point. In the immigration context, officers aren't focused exclusively on criminal behavior. Often, they're looking for something much simpler: signals that your true intentions may not match what you're telling them at the counter. Immigration law places a lot of emphasis on intent. For example, if you come in on a temporary visa like a visitor visa, you're expected to follow the conditions of that status. A visitor visa usually allows short-term stays for tourism, family visits, or certain business activities. It does not authorize working inside the United States without proper permission, and it doesn't give you the right to move there permanently under that status. Because of this, officers sometimes look at digital conversations for signs that a traveler's plans might be different from what they're declaring. Imagine you tell an officer that you're staying 2 weeks to see family and explore a few cities. But in your chats, there's a message where you asked a relative to help find a job when you arrive. Even if that message was casual, exaggerated, or written without serious intent, in the context of a border inspection, it can raise doubts about whether you plan to obey the rules of your visa. In many situations, the question isn't, can we prove a crime? It's, does this person appear eligible to enter under the visa category they're using? That's why phones, full of photos, notes, travel plans, and conversations, can have so much weight during inspections. Everyday messages that felt harmless when you sent them can take on a very different meaning when someone is evaluating your intentions under immigration law. This naturally leads to another area of confusion: the different positions of temporary visa holders and lawful permanent residents when interacting with border officers. On the surface, they might look similar. Both stand in immigration lines, both present documents at a counter, both answer questions. But legally, their rights and risks at the border are quite different. If you enter on a temporary visa, tourist, student, or many types of work visas, you are essentially asking for permission to enter every time you arrive. The responsibility is largely on you to show that you qualify to be admitted and that you intend to follow the terms of your visa. Because entry in that situation is a request, not a guaranteed right. Refusing to cooperate with certain inspection procedures can lead officers to conclude, we can't verify this person's eligibility to enter. In that scenario, they may decide to deny admission and, in some cases, cancel the visa. For visa holders, that makes what happens at the inspection counter particularly sensitive. Lawful permanent residents, green card holders, are in a different legal position. They have already been granted the right to live in the United States. When they return from trips abroad, they are generally viewed as coming back to their home rather than applying to enter as visitors. Because of that status, the government typically cannot simply refuse a permanent resident entry for declining to unlock a device. However, that doesn't mean nothing can happen. Officers may choose to hold the device for additional examination. In some cases, phones and laptops can be taken for more detailed analysis, with the traveler receiving a receipt while the device is retained temporarily. So while the permanent resident's legal status is not automatically lost over a phone search issue, the experience can still become stressful and inconvenient. This all adds up to a difficult balance that many travelers never expect to face. On one side, the desire to protect personal privacy; on the other, the practical reality that border agencies have broad inspection powers and significant discretion. Knowing which category you fall into, temporary visitor or permanent resident, before you reach the airport can make a huge difference in how you approach that situation if it ever arises. You might also be wondering how deep a phone inspection can actually go once you hand it over. Is it just a quick look, or can it be more intensive? Under current procedures, there are generally 2 levels of electronic device searches. The first is a basic manual review. This is what most people imagine. An officer uses the phone's normal interface, scrolls through recent photos, glances at a few messages, maybe opens certain apps or files. It's usually done quickly and directly on the device. Because border search powers are broader than ordinary domestic searches, officers can perform this kind of basic look without necessarily having to show specific suspicion about you personally. It might be random or based on something in your travel profile. The second level is much more in-depth, often referred to as an advanced or forensic search. In these cases, officers connect the device to specialized tools that can copy and analyze large amounts of stored data. Depending on the device type and the software used, this process can reveal much more than what you see in a normal scroll through your phone. Because this type of search is highly intrusive, internal policy generally requires that officers identify a stronger reason, often called reasonable suspicion, of a legal violation or national security concern, before they use these tools. In practice, that means something in the interaction or the available information usually has to trigger a red flag. And here's the key point. Many travelers don't raise those red flags because of illegal activity, but because of unintentional signals. Officers are trained to look for consistency, When your answers, your documents, your travel history, and your visible digital footprint all tell the same story, inspections tend to stay straightforward. When things don't quite match, the situation can escalate. For example, if you say you're visiting for 2 weeks but arrive with multiple large suitcases packed as if you're moving for several months, that discrepancy might cause the officer to probe further. If your explanations keep changing or contradict your visa type, suspicion grows. If you appear extremely nervous, beyond normal travel anxiety, give conflicting answers, or avoid basic questions, that may also contribute to concern. Another common pattern that attracts attention is arriving with a phone that appears almost brand new and empty, especially if you clearly use smartphones in your daily life. Some people think that doing a factory reset right before travel is a good way to stay safe because it wipes messages and files. But from an investigative perspective, an unexpectedly blank device can actually look more suspicious. It may suggest that data was deliberately removed just before arrival, which by itself can create the level of concern needed for a more intensive search. Ironically, trying too hard to hide everything can sometimes attract more scrutiny than the original content would have. That's why many frequent travelers focus less on technical tricks and more on basic principles: being honest, being consistent, and staying composed. So, what can you realistically do before your next trip to prepare, while fully respecting the law? Think of a border inspection the way you would think of any important appointment. The time to prepare is before you walk into the room, not when you're already sitting in front of the interviewer. A simple preparation approach might look like this. First, review your digital footprint. Your phone probably holds years of conversations and content you never expected anyone else to see. If you're entering on a temporary visa, it can be useful to ask, could anything here be taken the wrong way? Like I'm planning to work without authorization, stay longer than allowed, or move permanently under a visitor status? The aim is not to become fearful, but to be aware of how ordinary conversations might be interpreted in an immigration setting. Second, consider how your apps are configured. Some travelers choose to log out of certain social media or messaging accounts before they land. Logging out doesn't remove data entirely, but it adds an extra step before older content is displayed and may reduce how quickly information appears if someone taps those apps. Third, remember the connectivity issue. If an officer lawfully instructs you to unlock your phone, and you comply, one small step before handing it over can change what loads in that moment, switching off wireless connections, often through airplane mode. This doesn't prevent a lawful inspection of what's stored on the phone, but it can limit new cloud data from streaming onto the screen while someone else is holding it. Fourth, be clear about your status. Know whether you're traveling on a temporary visa or returning as a permanent resident, and what that means in terms of rights and risks. If you're unsure, consider speaking with an immigration professional before you travel. Finally, focus on your demeanor. Clear, straightforward, and consistent answers, along with realistic travel plans, can do more to keep an inspection simple than any complex technical measure. In many cases, how you present yourself matters just as much as the documents you carry. The most important takeaway is this: airport inspections operate under a specific set of rules that many people don't encounter until they're already standing in front of an officer. By that point, it's too late to start learning. Our smartphones have become extensions of ourselves, holding our conversations, memories, plans, and offhand comments we only meant for friends or family. At an international border, that same device can suddenly become a lens through which authorities try to understand your intentions. That doesn't mean you should fear every interaction. Millions of people enter the United States every year without any significant issues. The difference is that informed travelers understand the environment they're entering and take a few simple, lawful steps to reduce misunderstandings and unnecessary exposure. Because when you're exhausted after a long flight, standing at the counter with your phone in your hand, that is not the moment you want to be discovering how device searches work, what cloud backups do, or how your visa category is interpreted. Preparation happens earlier, and sometimes that preparation is as small as 3 seconds, the brief moment it takes to adjust one setting before you hand over your phone. Small choices in those few seconds can determine how much of your digital life appears on that screen. When you think about just how much of yourself now lives inside that device, those 3 seconds suddenly become very, very valuable.